On behalf of the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, CDRI, and the Pacific Region Infrastructure Facility, PRIF, it is a pleasure to welcome you all to this jointly organized session. This webinar aims to present the key insights and messages from CDRI's second Global Infrastructure Resilience Report, also known as GIR 2025. We are aware climate and disaster risks are increasingly challenging infrastructure systems across the globe. And for the Pacific Island nations, these impacts are felt even more acutely, affecting not only physical infrastructure, but also livelihoods, connectivity, economic resilience, and community well-being.
This report builds upon the first report, which was launched in 2023, which provided a very compelling narrative on what is resilience dividend, why it is important to invest on resilience of infrastructure. GIR 2025 builds upon the first report, and it takes us from what to how in the present context of uncertainty and risk becoming increasingly complex and interconnected, which is resulting in huge losses to infrastructure, huge losses to the countries due to damage to infrastructure and interruption of services. GIR 2025 provides concrete and practical recommendations on how to build resilience of infrastructure for a wide range of stakeholders. The report emphasizes that resilience should be integrated across the entire life cycle of the infrastructure and highlights that investment on DRI helps us to achieve disaster risk reduction goals, SDG goals, economic stability, and also in protecting communities.
All right, I want to make just 2 quick points with 2 quick slides. First of all, infrastructure investment in the Pacific has been substantial and is growing. This doesn't even include private sector investment or domestically funded projects. But the report notes that island countries in general, face disproportionate risks. And in the Pacific, it's perhaps some of the most dire consequences of natural disasters. They are among the world's most exposed and vulnerable countries. The chart here shows 120 years of data on natural disasters. In Papua New Guinea, for example, on average 3 natural disasters a year. In Fiji, more than 2. Same with Vanuatu, and so on. And each natural disaster can take out years of GDP growth. The
messages, I would also like to highlight 4 key questions that this report has tried to address. First, how much damage will our country's infrastructure face from natural hazards and disasters, and what hazard will cause more damage? Second, the report has also tried to look at how do we go about building resilience infrastructure? What are the available tools, technologies, solutions, and what are the good practices from across the world? The third, the report has also tried to look at what are the provinces within the countries or which are the sectors which need more attention to enhance resilience, and where can we invest our resources, whether we look at try to gain the invisible resilience dividend, that is, try to invest on maintenance or retrofitting, or we focus on doing a very robust cost-benefit analysis so as to ensure that all the new projects which are being implemented are resilient. Streams, there are 8 key messages which are emerging from this report, and these messages are as follows. But what the report clearly shows is that the indirect impacts of infrastructure service failures can be as much as 7 times larger than the losses that will be incurred due to direct damages to infrastructure assets. The second important recommendations of the report or the key message from the report is the new infrastructure investment should be informed through risk assessments and cost-benefit analysis. The third message is the faster recovery and recovery preparedness can help reduce the impact on GDP. And it also tells us that faster reconstruction can also help us to reduce the losses to 1/3. We did a robust survey with the businesses, and what we understood that the businesses are the front line of disasters and have a long way to go to build their resilience. The fifth important message that is emerging from this report is about strengthening codes, standards, and regulations, and how on investing on invisible measures like maintenance and retrofitting are critical for building resilience of infrastructure. We have done a survey with more than 3,000 professionals, and maybe a little later we'll be providing more insights from that survey as well during the presentation. Technologies can transform the pathways for DRI. This is one of the very important message which is emerging from the report. AI-powered early warning system to 3D printed emergency housing and drones for preventing maintenance are some of the case studies she would highlight. Seventh message is on the nature-based and hybrid solutions and how it can be very cost-effective to build resilience of infrastructure systems. And finally, insurance is indispensable, but not enough. Resilience financing require a layered approach with a range of financial instruments for different risks.
So when an asset, an infrastructure asset, is performing under normal circumstances and a disaster hits, then depending on how much capacity it has to absorb that disaster, it can go its operational, normal operational performance down to half, to 3/4, even to zero. It can be destroyed. Then the operator, the asset manager, or the government begins to get ready, does the cleanup of the debris, does the contract for the repairs, gets all the materials. So how fast that process goes is depending on the capacity to respond of the government, of the utility, of the asset manager. And then it begins the reconstruction phase, and how quickly depends how steep this capacity to recover goes until the asset is built back better. So what we call the resilience dividend is that as governments, as the private operators of infrastructure, as the utilities develop a stronger capacity to respond, then the shock is not as strong next time. And therefore, the question of the report was always how those three capacities, to absorb shocks, to respond to disasters, to recover from those disasters, can be strengthened so that governments, private sector, utilities, operators can capture that resilience dividend. We have global databases built from the bottom up, detailed asset databases, detailed proxies otherwise, and it includes a resilience index to account for the inherent resilience weaknesses in different categories of countries. $102 billion a year gets lost every year on direct damages to roads and railways, or to power infrastructure, $110 billion a year on the right-hand side. So it allows us to begin to get a sense of the contingency funding requirements that countries have, the insurance levels, and what are the priority hazards to prepare for. 62% of the average annual losses are related to cyclone and hurricanes. But did you know that earthquakes are also very important? Here in yellow, almost 13% of the annual average losses are due to earthquakes. And therefore, the message of the report was saying, look, if the world really wanted to support the small island development states, resilience is important, and it has a disproportionately high benefit for these economies because of their small size. You can take a look at our public database, the Global Infrastructure Risk Model and Resilience Index. You can do all kinds of analysis for your country, for your sectors, all kinds of ways, and we are encouraging everybody to be able to use this information. And many institutions, the World Bank, Oxford University, UNECA from the UN Economic Commissions are beginning to use this data for their analysis of risk and resilience.
What I'm going to say is that for infrastructure, for good infrastructure, and from my experience, first of all, strong legislation. And I mean that regulations, policies, standard operation procedures, even acts that govern these things. So basically, good governance. Secondly, we need a workforce that's highly capable to look after these assets. So we need a very, very good succession plan and making sure that the skills and the knowledge is being transferred during the construction and once when we move into the operation and managing the assets. Third, we need very good synergy between the many actors that are involved.
Making sure that everybody understands the needs, understands the capacities, and brings us contribution to make the overall system critical becomes really important for resilient infrastructure. Being able to understand, and engineers on the ground have a pretty good sense of what are the weakest links of the infrastructure.
And I think what our Pacific partners have been saying, and it's certainly the approach that the Australian Infrastructure Financing Facility for the Pacific is working to support, and that is resilience as one of the guiding principles in the Pacific Quality Infrastructure Principles, or the PQIPs, and I think TT's on the line as well. These principles set very clear expectations for quality and resilience, and so looking at the report today and the practical suggestions in that context is very, very helpful. The final thing I wanted to say about what I'm hearing today is how important partnerships are, and how important it is to have these sorts of settings between governments and development partners, practitioners, and it's thanks to regional organisations like PRIF and technical bodies like CDRI that we can have these conversations. And so let's keep contributing to this effort to have resilient and quality infrastructure in our region.